Welcome to another episode of Deported. My name is Alex, and today I'd like to talk about one of my favorite sports games, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. It was not like a typical sports game, it felt more like a video game than a sports simulation, which is probably why I like it so much. It also had an excellent soundtrack. With songs from Dead Kennedys, Goldfinger and Primus, it is one game you won't want to play muted. The 9 levels span the USA. And the intuitive controls allow one to perform amazing tricks. There's not much else to say about it, except that it was and is one of my favorite PlayStation games.
But Alex, I played that game on the N64.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater for the Nintendo 64 is a very good port of the PlayStation original, and serves as a good example of the limitations of a game cartridge. The differences are noticeable even before the gameplay begins though. For one, the game was originally developed by Neversoft on the PlayStation, and was ported by Edge of Reality for the Nintendo 64. Both were published by Activision. Also, this intro video playing now is absent from the Nintendo 64 version. Instead, we are treated to this.
It's a roundup time with a good horse. We're gonna drive one screaming off the street and ride, how we ride. Got a black uniform and a silver badge. Play cops for real and play cops for pay. Let's ride.
Oddly enough, the start screen bears a different title on the Nintendo 64 version, despite the cartridge's title being Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Wikipedia says the game was known as Tony Hawk's Skateboarding in some of the PAL territories, but I'm positive I have the NTSC version. I don't know what's happening. The control scheme is the same in both games. What maps to the triangle, square, circle, and X buttons on the PlayStation maps to the 4 C buttons on the N64. Even though the control scheme is the same, I found myself bailing tricks a lot more often on the N64, probably because the C buttons are closer together. Now for what you might think is the biggest difference, the graphics. The Nintendo 64 version has a slightly higher frame rate, while the PlayStation original has more detailed textures. But I think both look good. Take a look. What sets the Nintendo 64 port apart is its lack of content. The PlayStation version of the game has music videos playing at some levels like this one, Chicago. It's also lacking 2 songs, Vilified by Even Rude and Eurobarge by the Vandals. And the songs it does include are shortened, looped, and censored. Take for example the song Cherry Was A Racecar Driver. Probably safe to say that songs like that one were censored for Nintendo to keep their family-friendly image. But I wholeheartedly think the cartridge size of the Nintendo 64 limited the game severely, which would account for the lack of both audio and video content. The PlayStation version of the game is a 575 megabyte CD, while the Nintendo 64 version is a 96 megabit cartridge. Megabits were what Nintendo used to measure the size of their games until the GameCube, and I am positive they did so because it made them seem much bigger than they actually were. Case in point, Donkey Kong Country. If you recall, the back of the box stated it was an ambiguous 32 megs, and it is easy to assume that they meant 32 megabytes. But thanks to Nintendo Power, we know it was a 32 megabit cartridge, and thanks to ConvertUnits.com, we know that a megabit is actually 1/8 the size of a megabyte. So that 96 megabit cartridge is actually a 12 megabyte cartridge. And that is the primary reason for the lack of content. But for all the content it lacks, the Nintendo 64 version of the game is still a very good one, and every bit as fun as the PlayStation original. I recommend it. I found my copy at a used game store for $5, and I paid $1 for the PlayStation version at a thrift store. And lastly, for the Dreamcast version I paid 1 penny, plus shipping. I should probably talk about that version for a second. The Dreamcast version was developed and ported by Treyarch, and published by Crave Entertainment, and boy is it wonderful. It's got buttery smooth graphics, a high frame rate, all of the content from the PlayStation version, and is probably the best version out there. As for my overall recommendation, it's really up to what controller you prefer. All three versions are equally fun and are pretty common and cheap.